Hi everyone, welcome to the channel and welcome to my first review for Team Bookborn as part of SPFBO8. Today I'm going to be looking at the Blood of Outcasts by D.A. Smith. And just quickly before I get into review, if you're familiar with the reviews on my channel, this one will be a bit different because I won't be giving either a star rating or going through the normal breakdown of my weighted ratings. I'm going to keep those scores quiet until I've read all of the 6 books that are in my allocation, and I'll go through those when my part in SPFBO8 is over and I've announced the semi-finalist that I'm going to be putting forward for Bookborn to read. So with that said though, let's go and see what I thought of The Blood of Outcasts. The Blood of Outcasts then is the debut novel from author D.A. Smith. It was published in May 2022, just before SPFBO8 started, and it's a bloody tale of revenge set in a feudal Japan-inspired world. We have various battling clans in this world fueled on generations of distrust, and one woman who's trying to bring those clans together to help her in her quest for vengeance. So we start this story with our main character Masako pulling herself out of a river. She's seen her clan destroyed, her master beaten, and she has apparently been executed. Rather than dying though, Masako has been kept alive by cursed blood and the promise to destroy the Lord Council. I won't go any further into the specifics of the story for spoiler purposes, but those details are available on the back of book synopsis, so it just gives a little bit of an idea of what the story itself is about and where we find ourselves starting the journey. This story is told through Masako's eyes in a first-person, present-tense narrative style, which allows us to learn her thoughts and feelings in the moment, but which does have some drawbacks for me as a reader. In a typical first-person narrative, I often find there's a bit of an imbalance in the depth of characters because you get a lot of detail and a lot of information about the main character as you see the world through their eyes, but it doesn't give you the opportunity to really get into the heads of the other characters. I would definitely say that that rings true here, and it does mean that the characters around Masako don't get fleshed out as much as I would like them to have been. In terms of Masako, we don't see too much depth beyond the rage and the pride that really drives her forward in this story. We do get a little bit of history, which is in the form of flashbacks giving us our inciting incident to the tale and the moments leading up to that. I did find these slightly confusing, however, because they were written in the past tense as befits a flashback. However, there were a couple of them that just had the odd little bit towards the end of them written in the present tense, and because there was no chapter break first to provide a nice clean cut, I didn't realise at first in these instances that we had changed to the current point in time and we now had Masako telling her story in the present tense, having come out of a flashback. So a few times in the story when that happened, it just took me out of the moment slightly and I just lost the thread of the story a little bit. The final flashback that we had in the story was then told entirely in the present tense, which further confused me because I knew it was a flashback, it was titled as a flashback essentially, but there was otherwise nothing to separate it from the story around it. In terms of the world building, what we get here is quite an interesting one. Those familiar with Japanese culture will probably recognise the feel of the world and a lot of the terminology that's used throughout the book. For those not as familiar with Japanese culture, and I count myself in that number, there weren't any points where I found myself scratching my head and trying to figure out what was going on or what something meant, so I felt that overall the world building was quite accessible to the everyday reader. As the story goes on, we do see some bits of magic and mystery with Oni and Sora dragons and meters and this blood magic that Masako has. So there are various different elements that make this very much a fantasy story rather than just a historical fantasy set in feudal Japan. Here, I did quite like the meters. I thought that there was quite a bit of potential with their story, although I don't really know too much about them. I don't think it was explored deeply enough, and that might be because we're seeing them through Masako's eyes and she abhors meters. I did think that it was quite telling. There was a little bit where Masako advised us that she doesn't eat meat basically because meters exist, and I think that kind of intimates the power that the meters have and what they might be capable of. So I thought that was quite good, that was quite well done, and it was a nice way of giving us that little snippet of information. Masako's blood magic, again, is quite an interesting take, although having finished the story, I still don't really feel that I know the full limits or consequences of the magic, let alone the how and the why of it. The immediate consequences of the magic, however, and the effect that it has on Masako, especially in battle, do give us some of the most intense moments of the book, however. Overall, I quite like the concept that we get here. It's very much a Joe Abercrombie's Best Served Cold sort of story, but in a very different setting and told in a very different way. The main character had both highs and lows, but was at least a narrator that I could follow, and the world was quite well visualised and shows a good bit of potential for the progression of the series. The main thing that I didn't get on with though, and that really impacted my enjoyment of the story as a whole, was the writing style. Now, first person present tense is definitely one of my least liked writing styles, but I have read stories using this style that I have enjoyed, and it shows that if it's done well enough and all of the other elements come together well enough, that while not necessarily working for me, these stories don't necessarily have to work against me. Here though, I felt that the writing just didn't quite pull it off for me as a reader, and I didn't gel with the actual writing style overall. I found that too many times I was coming across little 2 or 3 word sentences that just didn't work for me. It was admittedly, but not exclusively, mostly during the battle scenes that had these, and you do generally find, regardless of the narrative style, that in these battle scenes, because of the tense, fast-paced nature of them, you do get short, sharp sentences that really help the flow of the scene. And in a first-person narrative, it's also, I feel, natural to have maybe a little bit of kind of a disjointed narrative, because the character is having to focus on various different stimuli in quick succession. In this book though, with 2-word sentences strung together and with various other little techniques as well, it just didn't work for me, and I found it to be overall a bit of a jumpy reading experience when I was going through those scenes. Whether it was during a battle scene or not, the overall pacing I found was a little bit off here and there. I felt that at some times we would just barrel from one moment to another without any real build up in between, and especially in dialogue that started to throw me, because there were times when there was a conversation going on between a couple of characters and the intensity would suddenly change with no real provocation that I could see, and it was a little bit off-putting when that happened. The final thing that really stood out for me with regards to the writing though was the various scenes where I felt we were lacking some dialogue tags. I found there were scenes that confused me because there were 3 or more characters involved and there was a back and forth conversation going on between several of these characters, but without dialogue tags in some of these instances telling us who was saying what, I found it really difficult to follow that conversation, especially because sometimes a new character who so far hadn't said anything in this scene would suddenly become involved but without being introduced by a dialogue tag, and it wasn't until the response included that character's name that I became aware there was a new player in the conversation. So that was just a little bit strange and a little bit off-putting for me as a reader. So on the whole, The Blood of Outcasts had some hits and it had some misses, but for me I felt that the misses just had more of an impact on my overall perception of the story. Now, I realise that I can sometimes be quite picky when the writing isn't working for me, and I can fixate on something that really wouldn't bother some other readers. So what I would say is, if you like a revenge story, if you like Japanese inspired fantasy with Ronin and with katanas slashing through the pages, definitely pick this one up, give it a go and find out if it's going to be one for you. So those were my thoughts anyway on The Blood of Outcasts by D.A. Smith. I'll leave a link in the description box below for the Goodreads page to this title so you can check it out and get more detail, and of course see other reviewers' thoughts on the book as well. There's also purchase links on that page where you can go to your local online stores and pick yourself up a copy. Also in the description box you can find all the links to my social media pages and support the channel pages, including my book club Discord and my Patreon. Do consider subscribing to the channel if you want to see more fantasy book content, including the rest of my upcoming reviews for SPFBO8. Thanks very much for your time today though. I hope to see you for another video soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.